In part 4 of our Google Sheets Athlete Dashboard project, we're going to learn how to make this athlete profile radar graph that will automatically expand when new metrics are added, as well as shrink when we take them back away. This is going to be a really powerful tool for displaying any sort of athlete profile versus the team average. So let's get after it. Okay, so we're back, and as a reminder of how far we got in the last video, we finished off our KPI charts and the text logic for the titles, and we are now able to add or take away team and positional averages based on checkboxes. And then we went ahead and copied the KPI chart down and made our second KPI chart. And then between the two videos, I just copied it one more time and made the third KPI chart. So our dashboard's really coming together. It's basically halfway done at this point. Now for this video, we're going to create the athlete profile radar graph that will sit down in this area here, basically this big square. So in order to get this started, we're going to need to add one more space to add a profile chart. So what this is going to look like is I'll just copy this KPI chart number 3, and I'm going to paste it down here, and what I'll put is athlete profile radar. And I'm going to need a couple of things here. So because these drop boxes all work, we can just copy these and paste them. The first thing we'll need is a start date. So I'll take this tab here and copy it down. So this will be our start date for our actual KPI chart, except for it's not going to be the start date, it's going to be the test date. So we'll say select test date. And then the next thing that we're going to need is metrics. So I'll select one of the metric and I'll paste that in here. And instead of test, I'll just say select metric. And then I'll just drag this down. We're going to want 8 of these because there'll be enough space for 8 metrics on our chart. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So perfect. Okay, that's the first part of our actual radar profile graph. And then the next part is we're going to do the text logic now on the header bar to get that started. So what this looks like is very similar to how we've been doing it in some of the other charts. We'll just type equals and then B3 for our athlete name, and then an and symbol, a quotation, and then remember anything we put in quotations will get printed as text. So I'm going to have a space between the name and the next sentence. So I'll type space, and then I'll type athlete profile, then another set of quotations with a space, and then an and then we're going to use our date. So I'll go text, open that up, and our date is stored in B35. So we'll select there, and then we'll put our format there. So it'll be YYYY-MM-DD, and then close the whole thing off and hit enter. And you will see nothing because the text is still the same color. So what we'll do is we'll make the text white, and I'll put it in the middle, give it another font. I like Lato, and maybe make it bold and then make it a heck of a lot bigger. And you can see now we have our profile. So if I were to change the date, you can see that now the date changes on our actual athlete profile. Okay, so that's how we do the text logic for the header. Now to create the actual radar profile, we're going to go back to our data reference tab, and we're going to do some setup here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by copying this KPI chart 3 that we had from our last video, and I'll paste that in there. And I'm going to now add a bunch of different tabs in here. So the first one, we'll do a copy here for the athlete. So I'm going to need to look up the athlete, and then I'm going to need a spot to look up all of my different metrics. So I'll type in metric 1, metric 2, and I'll drag that down so it becomes 8. So that takes me all the way to 8. And then the last thing that I'll need here is going to be the date. And I'll just make these all orange and bold because these are going to be my reference cells. Then underneath those, we're going to have another spot for metric. I'm going to use these black cells here. So I'll type those, I'll copy those over. And the first one's going to be metric. The second one is going to be date. And then we're going to have data, the team standard, and then the athlete standard. And I'm just going to copy and right click paste the format here. Now across the top here, we're going to have a few more things that we pull out. So just right here, we're going to be pulling out the 0 value, the 100 value, and then the average. We'll just put T average for team average. And then just to make this all look nice, I'll just fill the rest of these in with black as well. Okay, so this is going to be our data reference spot where we pull out all of the different values. The first thing that we're going to want to pull out is the actual athlete name. Easy way to do that, the same way we've been doing it all along. We'll just go equals and then go to our KPI dashboard, and we know that we selected in B3. So I'll hit enter, and you can see now it pulls out our athlete name. We're going to do the same thing for our metrics. So I'll type equals KPI dashboard, and we'll go down to our metric number 1, and it is B37, hit enter. And then I should be able to drag this down, and it should give me all of those metrics. And we'll just check to make sure this is working properly by deleting some of them. And indeed it is. So I'm going to put some metrics in here so that when we do our calculations, we can verify if they're working. So that works well. And then the last thing we're going to need is our date. And we'll do that the exact same way. We'll just type equals and then go back to the date value. So that is the initial setup for our actual sheet here. Now, what I want to be able to do is actually pull out the 0 and the 100 value for each one of these metrics, because I'm going to be using those to calculate the actual score the same way that we did over here with the min and the max values. It's the same idea. So we're going to do a very similar formula, and what it's going to look like is equals VLOOKUP. Open that up, and we're going to look up the actual test. So in this case, Z3, and we want to look that up on our test setup. So I'll go down over to test setup, and we want to go from A1 all the way over to D, and I'm going to delete that so that it goes all the way down. And then what I want to do is take the min, so it's going to be the third column. If we go test name, min better, and then third is going to be the min value, and then comma, false, because these are not sorted, and then hit the bracket to close that off and hit enter. What you're going to see is it's going to pull out that value for me. Now what I want to be able to do is actually drag this formula. So we have to lock a couple things in here. We know that the test setup range is never going to change. So I'm going to hit F4 and just put $ in front of all of that, because that will lock it in place. And then we know that the Z is never going to change. So we'll just put a $ in front of the Z, and that way the Z won't change, but the 3 can. So when I hit enter, I should be able to drag this down now. Okay, so that works really well. If I drag it over 1, it's still going to give us the third, but if we change this 3 to 4 so that it references the 4th column now, it'll pull out that max value. And now I should be able to drag that down no problem. So that's a quick way that you can set up your formulas so that you're actually able to drag them. Now the last thing that I want to pull out here is actually the team average. So we're going to do that with the average formula, and what this is going to look like is equals average, and I will open that up, and we want to index the actual test. So I'm going to use the index function, index, open that up, and we want to look in our data, and then we want to reference a column. So when it's asking me for row, I will just put one more comma and go to the column, and we're going to match for the test name. So I'll type match, and the test name is stored in Y3. And sorry, no, the test name is stored in Z3. That's my mistake, Z3. And then what we'll do is we're going to look for it in our headers, and then I will close that off and hit enter, and it will give us our average value. And I'm just going to decrease the decimals on this a little bit, bring it down to 2, and I'm going to drag this down now, and it should just auto-populate all of these cells. And just as a reminder of how that works, I'll just take you through that formula one more time. So the index formula, we're going to look in our data. Remember that we have a named range for our data, and then we're going to match for the header. So I'll take you back to the data and just give you a quick demonstration of how that works. When we go to our data and we're looking for the beep test, what it does is it goes through all of this data, okay, all of it, and it goes across the top and matches for the test that we've actually selected, in this case here, and it takes this whole column of data and creates an average for it, okay? So that's how we would do that. If we wanted to reference, say, a specific row, if we wanted Taylor's scores from 2020, 01, 03, then we could do the exact same thing, but instead of matching for the column, we would match for the row. So we would maybe match on the date and the position or something like that. We would come down here and we could match to get the entire column if we were going to index, say, all of his scores from one date. Okay, so there's two ways to do that, but usually for the purposes of our project, we're matching for the column so that we can pull out all the scores or a subsection of the scores for a specific date. For example, sometimes we just want to pull out any of the scores that match a certain position. So in this case, we would only pull out kind of those ones. Okay, so just to walk you through how that kind of works. So now we have all of our actual pieces to be able to create our metric chart here. We know this metric chart is going to go for a total of 8 metrics. So I'm just going to put some squares around the 8 metrics. I just think it makes it look a little bit nicer. So now we're going to build out this whole data table here based on the data that we've already pulled out. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually filter out all of these values so that whichever ones we select just get put in here. Now we could do it, I could just type equals and reference them, but we're going to use the filter function so that if there's any gaps, it just sticks them all together. So what this looks like is equals filter, and we'll open this up. And what I actually want to filter is the range of Z3 all the way to Z10, and then it's going to ask me for my condition. And I want to do that when Z3 to Z10 does not equal nothing. Okay, so again, does not equal is two triangle brackets open towards each other, and then I'll close that off and hit enter. And you can see now it's going to filter out all of our kind of tests. And that works really well. The only thing that we're going to do to this formula is wrap it in an if error formula so that if there is an error, that it'll just give us a 0 value. So at the beginning of the filter, I'll type if error, open that up, and then at the very end, comma, and what do I want it to do if there's an error? Just give me nothing. So we'll go 2 quotation marks and hit enter. Okay, so it didn't change anything from the formula, but if there was no test in here, it would just give us blank. Now, the next thing that we want to do is pull out the actual date. Okay, so an easy way to do this would just be to equal the date that we chose if we knew that our test was always on that date. But what happens if we had an athlete who missed that testing date? What I want to be able to do is pull out the last time they did that test as well, okay, to create their profile from. So for example, if we were referencing 2020-01-15 for Dave, and he performed his beep test, but the counter movement jump he didn't do in that testing round, I would want to pull out the last time that he did his counter movement jump for the purposes of this chart and graph that. So we're going to use a pretty long formula here to match for a bunch of different things that is going to allow us to pull out the last time that the athlete did the test. Bear with me here, this is a bit of a longer formula. How we're going to do this is we're going to use the max ifs formula to pull out the maximum date that matches all of our criteria. So what this looks like is equals max ifs, open that up. The first thing that we want to do is take the max of the actual date range. So I'm going to go index, open that up, we're indexing our data, and then again we're referencing a column, so we'll leave the row blank and we're going to match for date. So I'll type in match, open that up, and then in quotations, date, and then comma. And where do I want to match for that? In our headers. So you can see we're doing it the exact same way we've done it in other parts during this project. And I'll use comma and close that off. So that is our actual range. So we're going to reference the max date. If I close that all off. Now when I hit comma, it's going to ask me what I want my criteria ranges to be. So the first one that we want is the max date. So what I'm going to type in is the exact same thing. So index data, match for date. Where do I want to match for that? In headers, comma, close that off. And when do I want to do that? If I hit a comma, what is the criteria that I want? And when you're using some of these ifs formula, all of your criteria has to be in quotations. So I want to match for that date, quotations, when it is less than or equal to. And then when I'm referencing an actual cell, I have to use the and. When it is less than or equal to the date that we have chosen. And I'm going to lock that in because that's never going to change. Then when I close this off, let's see what this gives us back. So it's going to give us a number because it's not formatted as a date. So I'll just quickly format this as a date. So you can see it's giving us the exact same date that we've pulled out. Because what this formula is going through and doing is taking the max date value when it is less than or equal to the date that we've chosen. And it will always be equal to because we're choosing that date from our actual data. Now the next thing that we want to check for is we need another criteria range. And this time we're going to go index and we're going to match for the actual athlete name. So again, we'll match our data. We don't care about the row. We'll use the column and we'll match, open that up. And this time we want to match for athlete name and we want to look for athlete name in our headers. Close that off. We got to match up all of our brackets, comma. When do we want to look for the athlete name? When it is equal to the athlete name that we have chosen, in this case Z2, and I'm going to lock that in. So hit enter, and you can see nothing will really have changed, okay? But if I go to my actual data, I'll show you how this works. So what we're doing is matching the max date when it's less than or equal to the date we've chosen, and it matches the actual athlete's name. So this athlete has a test on 1/15/2020. If I were to go to the data, and for Dave, 1/15/2020, if I were to delete this whole kind of row, actually, let's just delete the date and the name, and we'll put those back after, and go back to my data reference, you can see the last known data for this athlete was 1/14/2020. So it's pulling out the next largest date. Okay, so I'm going to go put that data back. 1/15. Okay, and we have to add one more condition, and the last condition is to check whether the test box is not empty. So the actual test that we're looking for. We'll go to the end, one more comma, and then the last range that we want to look for is index. Open that up again in data. We don't care about the row, so we're matching for the column. Match, and in this case, we want to match for the actual test, which is stored in Y13. And we want to look for that in headers. Close that off, close the whole thing off. And we want to look for that when that test is greater than 0, okay? And what this is going to do is it will return the value only if that test value is greater than 0. And I can't really think of any tests that have a 0 value, so we will just use this here, and I'll hit enter. And again, it's going to select that date. But now let's take away the beep test from that date. So 1/15/2020, if I go back to my data, and I go to 1/15/2020 for Dave, go to my beep test, and I delete that, what you'll notice is now it's pulling out 1/14/2020. Okay, so it's only taking that date if there is a beep test score there. So I'll go back to my data and undo that. So let's just make sure all of our references make sense. The date is locked in, the athlete name is locked in, and this should be draggable. So I should be able to hit enter and just drag this down now, and it should work. Okay, so you can see it's going to pull out all of our tests. So that was a long way of saying that we're matching for all of these things. Okay, and then the next thing that we want to pull out is the actual data. So again, we're going to use a pretty long formula to pull out the data that matches the test and the date. So what this looks like is we're going to use the filter formula this time. So it'll be equals filter, open that up, and we got to use that index to find our range again. So we'll go index, open that up, and we want to reference our data. Again, we don't care about the row, so we'll go to the column, and I want to match for the actual test name, which is stored in Y13. And I want to look for that in the headers, and then close that all off. And now we're going to get into our conditions. So the first condition that we're going to have is when our athlete name equals the athlete name that we've chosen. So what this looks like is index, open that up, again look in data, double quotations, match, this time athlete name, and we're going to look for that in headers, close that off, and we want that to be equal to, in this case, Z2. So if I hit enter, you can see it's now going to give us all of our values, but we only want the one that now matches that date. Okay, so then the next condition, if I go back to my formula here, I'm going to type equals, and one more condition, index, data, and then we're matching for date. Open that up, quotations date, quotations, comma, in headers, comma, close that all off, and we want that to be equal to the actual date that we've pulled out before, which is stored in Z13. Now, when I'm going to do one more thing, because I know that this value is never going to change the actual athlete value, so I'll lock that in, and I'm going to hit enter, and now you can see it's just going to pull out that value for that date. I'm going to wrap this whole formula in an if error so that if there is an error, it's just going to give us nothing. So I'll go to the beginning of the formula, type if error, open that up and go right to the end, and I'll do double quotations, close that off, and I should be able to drag this down now, and it gives us all of our values. Now the last thing we have to do is just create our standards. And if you remember, our standard formula is just value minus min over max minus min times 100. So we just have to do that for our team, and we already have all of these values pulled out. So this should be pretty easy. So I'll type equals. I'm going to wrap this in an if error too. Don't let that confuse you. So I'll just type if error, open that up, and then our actual formula is going to be mround, open, and we're going to do, in this case for our team standard, we'll need two quotations here. Our value is our team average minus our zero value, bracket, divided by our maximum value minus our minimum value, bracket. What I'm going to do is multiply that by 100, and then we'll do our mround piece, which is, we're going to round that to 0.5, and then I'll close that off, and then it'll give our value. If error is going to just be a double quotation, hit enter, and it's going to give us all of our values. And Google Sheets is pretty smart, so it knows kind of what our autofill is going to be. So I'll just hit enter. We'll just make sure that this matches, and indeed it does. So that's great. Okay, so if that didn't work, all I would do is just drag this formula down. And now I'm going to use almost the exact same formula. So I'll just copy it, and then I'm going to go to my athlete standard and paste it. I need the equal sign, but now instead of our team average, I'm going to use the actual value that we've already pulled out. In this case, it's going to be AA13. And that's going to give us now our athlete standard. And again, we'll use that autofill function. So now we have all of this pulled out. It's just a matter of creating our graph. So what I'm going to do is go to insert, and we'll go to chart. And it's going to give us a blank chart here. I'm going to change the chart to be, where is it, a radar chart. And now I'm going to add my series. So the first thing I'll need is my actual metrics. So those are going to be stored in Y13 or Y12 all the way down. So I'll hit add another range. Then the next thing I'll need is my athlete standard. And then the last range is going to be my team standard. And I'll hit OK. And it's already kind of given us our chart a little bit here. Now there's a couple things we can do. The first thing, if we use column, or if we use row 12 as headers, now we'll get our actual header values. We'll go into our customize. In our chart style, I like to put it to take off smooth, no chart border color, and no background color. If we go to our, in the series, I like to change things around a little bit. So our athlete, what we'll do is I'll give that a solid line, and I'll make that sort of a darker blue. I'll make it a little bit bigger. I think that looks good. And then for our actual team standard, we'll give that like a darker red, but I'll make that a dashed line. Okay, and I think that looks good. We'll make that a bit bigger. And then we'll go down to our vertical axis, and we know what our maximum value is. It's going to be 100 because we've converted everything to a score out of 100. The option to add the Y as labels. Okay, so we click that, and that puts our actual tests on there. And then when we go back to our grid lines and ticks, what we can do is take out our major grid lines, and it still shows sort of that kind of profile graph part. And I think that looks pretty good there. Okay, so that is basically our chart. Okay, so now we have our actual graph created. We have the headers around the outside. And then if I copy this graph, Control C, I can paste this on my dashboard and paste it right in here. And I'll just match it up with other graphs here so that it's about the same size. And then now it's all sort of put together nicely. And you can see we can take away different series, and it's going to automatically just change our radar profile to match whatever test we select. And this is a really powerful metric because of the way that we've built this out. So this looks pretty good to me. That is basically it for this video. In the next video, we'll get to work on the trend section that sits up here. But that's how you can quickly and easily create like a radar profile. So I hope this video helps you out, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.